Hey y'all, I'm Melissa Guerra. I am the Kitchen Wrangler, and this is part 2 of a 4-part series where I'm explaining to you how to make tamales at home. Now, like I said, this is a very basic recipe. There's all sorts of different ways to make tamales, and in time I will show you those different ways, but let's start with the very basic. And you know, I gotta remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just hit that subscribe button where you get to see all of my favorite recipes from here along the border in South Texas. So let's get started on part 2, and that is making masa. Now, when I was planning these videos, it was a little hard to figure out what part to put first. But I want to encourage you, if you are making tamales, skip on over to part 3, because at this point, you need to start soaking your corn husks. It takes kind of a while. It takes a few hours. So don't wait until you've made your masa to start soaking your corn husks. Anyway, sometimes I can't figure out the exact right order to show you how to do something on YouTube. So let's get started with the second part of making tamales, and that is to make the masa. But before we get too far into that process, let me remind you that you are gonna have to soak your corn husks. You can skip on over to video number 3 where I show you how to get that started, and that takes several hours. So you might want to stop here, go on to video 3. It's a very quick task, but it does take a while to soak. Watch that video first, you'll see what I mean. Let's get back to making masa. There's 2 different ways to make masa, or really I should say there's 2 different types of ingredients. You can either have artisanal type masa, or you can have supermarket type masa. And let me explain. If you have a small tortilla shop in your community, chances are around the holidays, they will make fresh masa. And it's not a very expensive ingredient, it's just very time consuming. I can show you how to make it at home, but that is another video. So if there is a tortilla shop in your community, call them and ask them if they make fresh masa for tamales. If they do, then you want to be there first thing in the morning and ask them to grind it fresh for you and buy as much as you need. A couple of inside hacks: make sure that you taste the masa before you buy it. Corn masa or corn dough, it ferments really quickly. So it's much better to buy it first thing in the morning from a tortilla factory, because then you know it's very fresh, it hasn't fermented. But if it happened to be left out a little bit long, it will start fermenting, and you want to know that before you start making your tamales. If you make tamales with fermented masa, you cannot unferment the masa. It has to be absolutely fresh. So once you buy the masa, you have got to get started on assembling it with the other ingredients and putting together your tamales. The process of making fresh masa includes this ancient process called nixtamalización. But what it means is you are combining the corn with calcium hydroxide. And what that does, you let the corn soak overnight with the calcium hydroxide, and there's a chemical process that happens that makes the nutrition in the corn available to the human body. It's a really important part of the process, and it just takes a few hours. Once the corn has been soaked and boiled, then it is ground up. Because the nixtamalización process takes several hours, it's really so much easier to find a tortilla shop in your community and to buy the masa freshly made there. Some tortilla shops will offer you masa that has already been prepared, or sometimes it's called masa preparada. So it has the lard and the salt already added and mixed into the dough. Try it out, see if you like it. I like to make my own. Occasionally at the supermarket you will find bags of fresh masa, but I will tell you that masa has had a preservative added to it so that the corn will not ferment. And in my experience, when you're making tamales with the supermarket fresh masa, it will start to foam and bubble, and it has this weird bitter aftertaste. Don't really recommend it for making tamales. Once you buy your artisanally made fresh masa, put it into a really big bowl and break it up. It has this terrific earthy scent, really gorgeous. It always reminds me of the holidays. So just break it up. We're going to add some of the pork broth that I collected after cooking the filling. Remember, in video 1, we boiled the pork, and you can see that this broth is kind of jelly-like because our broth had bone, well, the pork had bones in it, and so that always makes the broth very jelly-like. Usually, I like to warm up the broth before I start hand kneading the dough. It's just comfier on your hands. But I also wanted you to see this little layer of lard that collected on the top of the broth. And I'm definitely going to add that into the masa because we have to add lard to the masa, so we might as well use some of that lard that collected and rendered when we boiled our pork. You'll have to read the recipe to see approximately how much broth to add to your fresh masa, but because fresh masa has moisture in it, you don't need that much broth. Once you've added a little bit of the broth, then you start with the hand kneading. And it's not like wheat dough. We're not trying to develop any type of gluten because remember, corn is gluten-free. What we're trying to do is to feel through the masa and break up any lumps. I know, this looks like you could do it with an electric mixer. You probably could. I've never used an electric mixer. I always mix and knead mine by hand. And I can tell you the goal in kneading it is just to find those little lumps that are in the masa and to break them up with your fingers. Now that we've got the masa a little bit more smooth, let's add some of the lard. I probably don't add as much lard as other folks do. I just add the amount that I like. Because this is artisanal masa, I wanted to use a really nice lard. Now this is not a hydrogenated lard, this is a rendered lard, and sometimes you can find this at health food stores. You actually can. Lard does work into some keto diets, so you can actually find some pretty good sources of lard these days. So I just do this by feeling. I add enough, and I think this is enough. I'll find out, but I think this is enough. Check the recipe for more exact amounts, but I am just doing this as I usually do. Making tamales is a very tactile task. And there aren't a lot of recipes for tamales. It is just something that you have to do. And I will tell you, I taught myself how to make tamales. And the first time I made them, I was successful. And you will be successful too. You just have to dive in there and get to know the process. After 1 or 2 sessions of making tamales, you will be absolutely successful, I promise you. So have courage. Oh, well, yeah, it is challenging, but you can do it. I know you can do it. I have heard other people talk about a test for adding the exact right amount of lard, in that you add enough so that the masa will float in a glass of water. I have tried that and I think that that is way too much lard. You know, I always think of that soap that floats and it's like, I think 100% fat. I like to have a lower fat to masa ratio. More lard doesn't necessarily mean more delicious, and floating masa doesn't necessarily mean more delicious. It takes me about 20 minutes to knead all of this masa. It is a lot of horsepower in there, kneading and kneading, but you're just, like I said, just breaking up the lumps. You want the masa to have a pasty, light consistency. You don't want it to be like a putty or a stiff dough. You want it to be very light, almost like frosting, almost like that same consistency. We also have to add a little bit of salt. Don't be afraid to taste the masa to make sure that you have the right amount of salt. Once we've added the salt and the lard to the corn masa, the fermentation process will slow down. Nonetheless, once you have your masa ready to go, you have got to assemble those tamales. This will not keep in the refrigerator overnight. You need to get to work. Let's switch to the other version of masa. We made the artisanal type. Now we're gonna make the supermarket type. Not everybody has a tortilla factory in their community. You can make masa for tamales out of instant dry corn tortilla mix, and I have a full bag, and that's what I'm going to use for my tamales. And just like I did in the other version, we're going to add broth. I have never seen pork broth or pork stock at the supermarket, but for obvious reasons, dry corn tortilla mix needs a lot more broth. So I'm gonna add chicken stock. It's about the same as the pork broth. It has good flavor, and you can see that I'm adding so much more broth because dry mix does not have moisture in it. I've added 2 full boxes of chicken stock, and I added some of the leftover pork broth that I had from the first batch, and that still wasn't enough, so I added a little bit of water, and I finally got enough moisture into our dry corn tortilla mix. Because I'm calling this the supermarket style of masa, we're gonna use hydrogenated lard, because not everybody can find artisanally made lard, recently rendered lard. This one has been whipped, it's got some air in it, it's in this big shiny white block. It absolutely works. Taste it though. I know, taste all of your ingredients just to make sure that they haven't fermented, that they haven't gone bad. The worst thing you can do is to go to this much trouble to make tamales and you've got some rancid lard or you have some fermented corn. Just make sure as you're going along that you taste everything, just a little bit. Add the lard to the masa and continue to knead just as we did the other masa. Now, dry instant corn tortilla mix does not have as many lumps as fresh masa. Nonetheless, you do still have to knead it. It takes just as long because you have to keep working in more and more liquid. All right, well, we have made masa 2 different ways and we are ready to start assembling those tamales. Now make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel where I share all of the recipes from here in South Texas, all the recipes that I really love. And you know, if you have any requests or questions, you can email me at help@kitchenwrangler.com, or you can find me on social media. You can message me on YouTube, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. I'm everywhere and I'm always looking forward to hearing from you. I'm Melissa Guerra, I'm the Kitchen Wrangler, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here at the ranch again soon. Make sure you watch the next videos so you can finish your tamale making project. Bye now.